biometrics, your body as your identification, I think in November. And we typically have about 10 events a year. So you're on the website, pay attention, and if you've got topics you think would be interesting, feel free to reach out to one of the NYPAY members or through our communication channels. But this will be a wonderful event. We're getting started, and I'd like to introduce Zack Asher of Deloitte, who will be talking next.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I just want to couple quick comments on behalf of Deloitte. We're privileged to host NYPAY for.
I'm sorry, I wanted to thank them, and I spaced out on that. So thank you very much.
We're very flattered as well that you guys would like to host the discussion here. Although apparently my understanding is we had another one last year. There was a bunch of snow. Now it's started to rain. So. Perhaps we'll also be better meteorologists. We do a lot of great things for our clients, but don't know if the weather is on the list of services that we may need to work on.
We'd have to be able to control it, huh?
That is true. We do many things. Controlling the weather we can't do particularly well. Yeah. But real briefly, what do I do? I lead the payments practice within banking and capital markets for Deloitte. We have globally, we have folks that focus on payments in about 60 different countries with about 1,500 folks. The work that we do and the folks that you're going to meet from our practice really focus on acquirers, issuers, networks, the banks, and the fintechs, and what they're doing. And what our goal has been over the past couple of months or so is we do a lot of great work and we have a lot of great things, what we think to say and stories to tell, and we want to tell them. And so as an example, tonight's discussion on mobility, to give kudos to Ulrika and Sebastian from our practice who really spearheaded our thinking around what we think this looks like. And so we're honored to have the fellow panelists, and we think it's going to be a great conversation and hopefully brings about new ways of thinking of things that aren't just educational, but also bring a unique point of view. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sebastian to go through the panel. We look forward to a great conversation and a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
And this is being recorded. It will be up on our YouTube channel in a couple of days.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Zach. Can you guys hear us okay, or do we need mics? We're fine, right? Yeah, okay, fantastic. So we wanted to do a quick round of intros. My name is Sebastian Gores. I'm within the strategy and payments team here at Deloitte. And when we wrote this paper, I want to go through a couple of 3 pages, real quick pages, what the framing of this is and what we want to talk about. We also have the, you want to hold it up real quick. We brought a couple of issues of that paper that we wrote if you want to grab one afterwards and read up on what we were thinking. But we're going to start going into this a little bit. So before we do that, though, I wanted to give the panel a chance to introduce themselves. So let's just go through the round. So we have Shika Sharma here, Zack Asher, and Peter, and you got, I'm sorry, you have to say the last name yourself.
Guadagno.
Guadagno.
Is the American pronunciation. If we were in Italy, you'd say Guadagno.
Guadagno, so.
And you'd spell it with a G, not a Q.
Thank you. So, Shika, if you want to go first.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Shika Sharma, as Sebastian just mentioned. I'm here representing American Express, where I'm part of the Amex Digital Labs team, which is our innovation hub within Amex. And we are focused on primarily digital payments and digital membership products and partnerships.
My name is Peter Guadagno. I run a consulting firm for the last 22 years. I worked for the MTA from '89 to '94, and it was at a time when we were launching MetroCard. So I got to spend a lot of money thinking about the question, if you can buy a subway ride with this card, why can't you make a phone call with it? Or why can't you buy a cup of coffee with it? At Lord's Coffee Shop over there across 47th Street, because my office was on Madison Avenue at the MTA. And indeed, Bob Kiley liked those ideas, and he and some folks took it over to London. We have the London Underground, and we had signed a contract with Cubic for a magnetic stripe card, and we weren't going to put this out in an expanded utility mode, which is what we called it. Remember that, Michael? Yep, sure you do. And so it all died here in New York, but it came alive in London, because that's where Kiley went. And it came alive, and all the money we spent on figuring out how to do it was done by the London Underground. And it was done with smart card technology, not magnetic stripe technology as we had contracted for at the MTA. There are a lot of stories here. We can go through them later. Nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach.
My name is Zack Asher. I'm the VP of Business Development for North America for Masabi. We are a fare payments platform for public transit as well, so same industry as Peter has had a distinguished career in. We historically have deployed mobile ticketing applications. Those of you in the room who have used Metro North or Long Island Railroad and used the MTA eTix app will be familiar with our technology, and we are expanding that platform to be able to serve cities' entire electronic fare collection needs. So the technology that Peter was working on and that London famously deployed, yeah, absolutely. We are packaging. Thank you for the advertising.
Thank you, Deborah.
We are packaging on a platform that is making it radically more cost-effective for agencies of all sizes to deploy. We're also acting as a digital integration point for agencies. So we have integrated within Uber and within Transit app to allow for the first mobile ticketing or the first purchase of fares for public transit within those two applications. So very excited to be here.
This is the first time we've ever had two Zacks at one event, so
It's a good name.
yeah, it is a good name.
Thank you. So what we wanted to do is frame the conversation a little bit, and this is the background of the paper that we wrote. So if you can't see it, if you know, it's fine. I think I can just talk about it. So to frame this up, so as we all know, the customer journeys are
Actually, you might want to move.
you want to see
We'll
it.
move. No, you can go through the slide and then we'll get back on the chair.
So I don't want to get you up on the slides, but the overall story is that we're thinking the customer experiences are changing as everything is getting closer together. Everybody wants to have something that the consultants say that a lot, but so do the payments companies. So seamless customer experience, right? So if you think of a experience that happens at Amazon Go or at Uber where you don't really think about making the payment, it just happens in the background. We're seeing this across a lot of different industries, and so we wanted to apply this thinking that you see within retail, that you see within the telecommunications space a lot into the transportation space. We are thinking that there's a lot of new models that will come about and new entrants that will make it more interesting for the incumbents that are currently within the payment space. And just to talk about the price a little bit, the size of the price a little bit. So if you look at the transportation sector, public transport revenue is around 75 billion, rental cars are around 42 billion a year, and taxis are around 25 billion, and rideshare is around 22 billion currently estimated with a 20% growth rate. So it's around 150 billion a year that you can need to look into, that things have to get paid and transactions have to be made. And here we're not talking yet about any ancillary services that take place. You're not talking yet about corporate cards that might facilitate payments that people might have for professional drivers and so on. So the size of the prize is large. So how we're thinking about this, and just as an easy example is, so you start at some point in time in the morning, for instance, just think about this customer journey. You start at home, you're going to work, and you're doing all sorts of stuff in between. So just the transport that you're transporting yourself might include rail, might include subway, might include specifically within the more urban areas, taxis, Uber, city bikes, could be all sorts of different modes of transportation where you right now have a single line customer experience you need to pay each time. And there could be a future where everything through platformification, for instance, is being brought together into a single payment where you have additional services also being part of that. So this is the customer journey. You could also think of a different future where we're thinking about autonomous cars, for instance, where the cars at some point we're thinking 2040, 2050, the time of, we call this L5, so where the cars are really autonomous, not just parking themselves and where we are right now, but at some point the vision is that cars are actually doing things by themselves without us touching them anymore for the driving purposes. So then these cars have to get, I think you guys can come back. These cars have to get maintained, and they have to go to the shop, and they get gas, and they go to the toll stations, and all this kind of stuff. And at some point, they will all do this by themselves. the car manufacturers are already right now thinking about how they can implement wallets into the cars. They want to go away from their current business models where they're the providers of the loan services for you to buy a car or for corporate fleets to purchase and lend the cars out. But they're thinking about how to include wallets into the cars, right? And so this is just another option that the current folks are having to make money. So we're thinking there's going to be mainly three players in the space, which are the mobility consumers, all of us that will use these services. There's going to be mobility managers in the middle that can facilitate the trips. We're seeing this right now, Uber doing this, or even Google trying to get into the play when you're going on Google Maps and you're typing in, I want to go to from A to Z. They are providing you with different options how you can get there. So they're already trying to be your manager, and at some point will probably also want to have a piece of the pie in order to facilitate this this mobility. So then, what we wanted to talk about, please do feel free to take a seat again. What we wanted to talk about is also where we come from. So this is, when we were preparing for this, I think, Peter, you outlined that this is a great vision. At some point, there's going to be opportunity spaces, and it's going to be challenges for existing players as well. But where we're really coming from is maybe a good point to start thinking about. So you said it died at some point. What you did.
said the what?
You said it died. You wanted to bring in the phone conversation and the Metro card, everything together, and you brought it back to New York, and it died.
Well,
So why did it die?
it died because we implemented the wrong technology to expand the utility of the card. So we couldn't do payments in a secure way with magnetic stripe technology. We looked, we tried to find a way to do it with mag stripe technology. I'll never forget the day that Ray DeCozin, the chairman then of Cubic, threw the chairman and CEO of Verifone out of my office because he wasn't going to share the read-write technology that was MetroCard. Well, with that kind of an attitude, we couldn't expand anything. Matt Cole is now running Cubic, and it's a completely different philosophy. The management team is different, the people are different, the philosophy is different. And so it's not as difficult these days in working with guys like Cubic, which control most of the fare collection systems. But I would put it to this audience, are we really talking about mobility? Are we talking about the use of a piece of payment, a plastic, I don't want to call it a card, but some form factor that lets you not just ride, but go to the zoo, find a way to get to the amusement park, find a way to go to the venues that tourists attend to, because this isn't about the guy the person who's commuting into Manhattan every day, coming into Grand Central at Penn Station. That person knows their drill. They know what they're doing. It's about the consumer who comes to Manhattan, who comes to New York to visit, the tourist who says, I don't have a clue how to get to anywhere. Oh, I want to go to Fort Rockaway. I want to go to Rockaway Playland. I want to go to a racetrack. I want to do something else. How do I get there? What do I do? And we don't have any way to help that person. So I don't think it's just about mobility. I think it's about a lot of other things. But this is a good first step. And I would put it to you all to think about the ATM sharing arrangement. In 1969, the first ATM was deployed. It was 1980, the mid-80s. Ron, when was it before we started sharing ATMs? When did that happen?
In the 80s somewhere.
In the 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. It didn't happen overnight. The first ATMs were deployed in the early 70s. I worked for Manufacturers Hanover Trust. And because I had a banking background, when I did a project with the MTA, the question was, should we deploy ATMs to Metro North and Long Island Railroad platforms? Could we make money doing that? The year was 1986. The answer was an affirmative. Yes, you can. You should. We did. Then the subway system came along and said, can we put them in the subway system? We said, not on your life. You're going to put $60,000 in a machine in a subway system at 4 o'clock in the morning? That's going to be there the next at dawn. So that's how I got involved. And I brought a payment perspective to the MTA that they did not have. And it was all about transactions. Michael.
Yeah, can I just push back a little bit, Peter? I know that.
Yeah, push back, Michael. I expected you to push
your
back.
comment
We
about,
work together.
This comment about that it's only about the tourists, or it's primarily about the tourists. When I think about mobility, and when I think about this area in New York, we talk about all the different providers of those transportation services that you had up on the slide. It's really about managing all of the capacity that the city has, and showing people or advising people on how best to get around in the most efficient, frictionless way.
Right.
And so even for that guy that's coming in every day, it may be worthwhile for him or her to know that the A line is backed up and that they shouldn't be taking the A line, they should be doing something different.
No question.
And only when you have a congestion management back end or some larger infrastructure are you able to then take all these data feeds from all these different transportation providers and say, don't take the A train today. You can take Uber or Lyft or rideshare or scooter or some other transit line. So I believe that the mobility is more, what we're talking about is more than just about the tourists. I think it's about all of the riders in
I agree.
jurisdiction.
No, I agree. I was just including the tourists. Yeah. The fact is, you can't have this without a back-end settlement system.
Yeah.
That is the key. And these guys are perfectly positioned as one example. First Data is perfectly positioned, except they're being acquired now, merging with Fiserv. I don't know what happens to the front end. What happens to the front end if you have a First Data or a FIS coming together to create that settlement system? You'd have to be a big part of it.
We're actually
Or an
no longer
American
just
Express.
a front end, Peter. Yeah. So I think the point is right, and we're talking about a lot of different concepts here: mobility as a service, integrated mobility, congestion management, dynamic pricing incentives.
Data integration, infrastructure.
I have to speak louder, don't I?
A lot.
Yeah. Okay. My voice is not as loud as his. I'll keep
Yes,
that
it
in
is.
mind.
You just need to put more air behind it.
I was saying that we're talking a lot about different concepts here, and mobility as a service is one of them. Integrated mobility is another one. Information and trip planning, multimodal trip planning, multimodality, congestion pricing, dynamic incentives, and dynamic pricing, clearing and settling. So I think as we continue through this discussion, we're obviously going to parse those. As far as what does it mean to be the front end experience, I think there's certainly value from an information management perspective in terms of helping people discover what the right mode is. Even when we're talking about incorporating payments, incenting people to know that that is the right and preferred method. But that's not what we're focused on at Wasabi. So what we're focused on at Wasabi is actually packaging the platform such that there has to be a layer for transit specifically, as you well know, Peter, to be able to apply these types of rules, apply transit rules, entitlements, apply, recognize and process the fare policy, handle inspection, and be able to facilitate payments with different forms of fare media, such as smart cards, such as contactless EMV, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. And so, for us, the front end really isn't the experience or the strategy and the focus of our company. We're much more so on that platform, that layer, so that trans agencies of all sizes can start to incorporate, those integration points digitally for fare payments.
And I would say from American Express's standpoint, we do actually straddle both of those pieces, both the back end as well as the front end aspect. So as a network, we're obviously very focused on making sure any of the payments that do come through these fare systems will work, and all of those rules that need to be in place are in place and are hitting appropriately. Particularly when we think about the EMV contactless rollout for the MTA that happened earlier this year, the UX and the user experience was super important for marketing this new ability and starting to change the customer behavior of being able to use contactless, speeding through these turnstiles that historically you have always had to swipe a card in order to go through. Particularly for tourists who are coming to the city, they need to buy that single ride, or maybe they're figuring out how to add money, for a limited amount of time onto their card to get to their destination. They now have this interoperable device in their palms, and they have the ability to just tap and go through those turnstiles quickly.
Do you know what the adoption rates are for this?
They're definitely still picking up because the MTA is in pilot mode. So the MTA is only actually live in about 16 stations and the Staten Island bus terminals as far as contactless. So it's primarily the 456 line right now. And then 2020, there's a much bigger rollout plan.
Okay. And how are you guys thinking about getting people onboarded to this?
So the good thing is for any of our customers as well as any users of the mobile wallets, their ability to tap and pay to go through the turnstiles is really automatic. So that EMV capability lives within their device and within the cards that they have added to these mobile wallets. And it would really work the same as if you were to tap your device at a point of sale within a merchant store.
Okay.
So there's no education, there's no training that you have to worry about or think about?
There's definitely still a level of communication that will happen as far as the MTA introducing the capability, but yes, it's more to equate it to the fact that it should be the same as your experience at point of sale.
Who's going to promote that to the consumer? I'm sorry.
I just wondered, because we've been using this term mobility as a service, what does that actually mean?
That's a great
Can someone
question.
repeat what Deb said, 'cause I couldn't hear it.
The question was, what does mobility as a service actually mean? I don't actually think that there is a definition that's been widely agreed
The Federal
upon.
Transportation Administration in the United States has determined that we're going to call it mobility on demand. We're not going to call it, they're calling it mobility as a service in Europe. So we're not going to do that here, according to the FTA. We're going to call it mobility on demand. So you have to change the acronym.
I've heard it
Gonna try-
defined as a bunch of different things, Deb.
Yeah.
I've heard it defined as just an MTIC, just mobile ticketing, a
Right.
visual. I've also heard it from one extreme all the way to the other extreme, where it is this larger ecosystem that includes an account-based backend that's really a congestion management backend that includes trip planning and some device, a phone basically, that that somebody can access all this information, and then a payment part of it as well. So it's a larger process. But yeah, I think you would get however
Many
people
different
are here,
answers.
that's how many different definitions you get.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, from our perspective, we're interested in facilitating integrations so that people can pay for public transit within whatever digital avenue it is that they're looking to use. So, you're seeing all the various players, the ride-sharing companies, the journey planning companies, all these players creating these ecosystems that are, multimodal, that have rideshare, that now have electric bikes and scooters. They're trying to capture attention for the passenger. We are very much so focused on, at least in the first iteration of whatever mobility as a service will become, making sure that passengers have the ability to pay for their public transit within those applications. So we are actively having numerous conversations. That's why we've integrated within Uber and within transit. But I mean, I think, again, getting back to the various different things that mobility as a service could mean, and certainly within the Deloitte report, you spoke about some of these concepts. You talk about bundling and packaged offerings. In Europe, there are companies that are really focused on subscriptions as a model for a passenger be able to buy a €500 subscription offering that includes their public transit, their bike share, car rental, and access to a car whenever it is that they need for 5 times, whatever it might be, a month. Those types of models, are sort of, they're possible, but they're actually not really technical challenges. It's actually a business challenge, right? Is that actually something that's desirable for a consumer, to be paying for a packaged, a bundled service like that in advance? I mean, for instance, as an example, I don't buy a monthly Metro card because I'm traveling, and I don't necessarily want to pay that up front. There are people who are users of public transit on a consistent basis, who travel in the morning, in the evening, to go once on the weekend, and they'll buy that monthly Metro card. But as you begin to trip chain and have multiple different modes in one journey, I'm pretty skeptical personally about whether or not someone is going to pre-purchase a bundled offering across those different modes, because the mode choice is a very idiosyncratic choice. For instance, today it's raining. I wouldn't want to, if there was a scooter option, have the option of using a scooter in New York. And if I pre-purchased that, that's potentially just wasted money. So there are a lot of concepts, but I think as we certainly view mobility as a service now, right now it's just about integrating public transit in our mind with digital access points, as well as serving riders who don't necessarily have phones. We talk about solutions for the unbanked and the cash preferred riders, and then obviously, as we'll talk about with contactless EMV, if you want to create a true mobility as a service experience where someone is using one payment mechanism across different modes, contactless EMV is going to be one of the ways to do so. I think I recently heard that there are going to be 100 million new cards issued in the next 12 months in the US for contactless EMV, so it's coming.
Yeah, there's definitely a huge push across all issuers to make sure their cards are contactless.
Was there a question there?
Well, that just brings up, I mean, you can jump in, but security and fraud, just compromising data, the more different points you have, across which the information passes, the more vulnerability you have. And so, if you could address that or bring it into the conversation at some point, Sebastian, because that's enormous. And it's not talked about a lot because we talk about customer experience and the rest. But since there's not a strong economic model right now for anything you guys are talking about, I mean, the ride sharing services need money. Fraud becomes a problem. A bigger problem.
Yeah, I think it's fraud and the role of data in general, right? So in all these business models, and maybe Shika and Zach, you can talk about what you also see, not necessarily, but about your own company if you can share. But I know you're seeing a lot of startups, a lot of ideas in the market space. So how are they dealing with, specifically as startups, with data security and generally what you're seeing in terms of new ideas in this field?
Yeah, so just to even take a step back, if we think about American Express's brand, 3 of the things that we really pride ourselves on is service, trust, and security. And so when we look to partner with third parties, whether they're large or small, we have rigorous review and diligence processes because we want to uphold each of those things. Anytime we offer a service and it has our brand or our name on it, we want to be able to stand by that third party and that service. And so it's definitely true there. When you're working with a 10-person company, it's hard for them to dedicate a whole team to be thinking through the full information security or data security structure and architecture on their side. And so we'll work with them and make sure that we're trying to penetration test or vulnerability test what they have in place today. And as long as those types of things can meet our standards, we're happy to partner with a third party that can provide the right benefit and the right service to our combined customer base. But ultimately, even if you think about larger companies like the Googles of the world, data is the most important piece of information. And that's something that American Express holds very near and dear to our hearts. We care deeply about our customer data and safeguarding that data. And all of these third parties that we work with and ones that are starting to become our competitors who historically were not our competitors also want that data. And so it's thinking through what are the right frameworks to have in place, what are the right technical and non-technical, so contractual controls that we need to put in place when we're working with these partners before providing a service or a product to our customers.
Are you seeing a lot of new startups in this area right now when you think about transport and payments? Are you working with some in this area that you can talk about, or what are you seeing in the market just in general?
So I can talk about just a few of the partners that we have launched with. So one of the more recent smaller partners that we launched with is called Freebird, and they provide a travel delay rebooking service. So what we've started to do is introduce this benefit to a number of our customers who are using amextravel.com and allowing them to enroll in this free benefit. And it allows them to really have this sense of security of if their flight is delayed or if it's canceled for some reason, that American Express in partnership with Freebird will help them get to their destination by rebooking a new flight for them. But then, outside of just that one example, Amex itself has been within the travel business for over 100 years. It's something we very much pride ourselves on overall. And then separately, we are constantly just working with large and small partners to test and learn new functionality and features.
And
that
what are
would
you
be
doing
beneficial.
what are you doing in terms of biometrics to secure the identity of the person that you are dealing with, the authentication aspect? Because in my opinion, biometrics is the only way we're going to get there. That is the only way we are going to solve the e-commerce fraud problem. Not that this is about e-commerce fraud, but biometrics gives us an ability to actually put back into a database some kind of analog structure. I hate to use that word structure because that's the wrong word. That's von Neumann. But it gives us an ability to protect the consumer's identity.
Yeah.
And we don't have anything out there right now that does that. Nothing. Nothing out there does that. PINs, your CID, give me a break. What do we have?
What about consumers' privacy concerns, though? You're giving out your biometric data and sharing that with whoever.
That is a situation that has to be dealt with, because if a biometric piece of data is compromised, it's gone forever.
That's a European perspective?
Yeah,
Because I was
yeah.
about to say the same thing.
Exactly.
No, well, I mean, if you compromise the biometric, it's gone forever, but there's a way to protect it. Question?
I'm just surprised to hear that there's 300 million plastic cards still being issued here in North America. Right? I'm just blown away. Right? Everybody has a phone, right? Even if you're in nowhere, you have a phone, right? Why are we still, like, to Paul's point about biometrics,
Peter.
right? I'm waiting for my minority report date where I could just go into the subway. Where is that? Right? And Paul, please, can you tell me, I was just talking with some folks here, right? The select bus where I have to take the receipt, the paper receipt in this day and age, to ride a bus. Who came up with that idea?
We did, 20 years ago. We, the MTA, the New York City Transit Authority. I mean,
Another point to your point, WeChat in China, you could get a haircut, noodles, and ride a cab and the subway.
and
We
never
had that
do
6 years
anything,
ago.
pull anything out of your wallet, because everything's done with your phone.
Yes,
Right.
they had that 6 years ago. I was in Beijing, right?
No, they have that, yeah.
And
You're
how
right.
is China beating us in payments?
How? Because we have a huge infrastructure of reliable telecommunications that China doesn't have,
Right, we have
and
a
that
legacy-
Europe
We're
doesn't
still
have.
in
We have a
legacy.
legacy system that's
We
not
still
broken.
tied that.
And getting consumers.
Unfortunately, that's true.
Think of the
Still tied to
challenges we've had getting people to use their phones to pay, because cards work great. Now that you've got contactless cards, it's getting even harder to get mobile payments to work, because it's easier not to have to authenticate and log into your mobile app, but to pull out your card and pay. We have a legacy
That's
system.
self-induced.
But David, you still have to pull your card out of your wallet or purse.
Yeah, I mean, it'll work at transit or place like that, you get your phone in your hand, but yeah.
Well, I mean, for transit, there's a Title VI consideration. You know,
That's
obviously,
true too.
cards don't solve for the unbanked community, but in public transit, certainly one of the key buying criteria is that you have to serve all riders in this country specifically, and that's regulatory. So there are product decisions that are being made specifically not for those who have phones, but for those who are cash
My
preferred.
cleaning lady has 2 phones.
Yeah,
So
there
what
are.
kind of person does not have a phone in North America?
There's about 10% of the U.S. population that doesn't have a phone.
Where
And
they don't have mass transport systems.
they do have mass transport systems. Yeah, there are over 1,500 mass transport systems in the U.S. A majority of those riders
Yeah, but those
in
10%
certain
of people who
communities
don't have
are
phones,
those
they
communities
don't have
communities
access
that
to
are
mass transportation.
no are those communities.
It's in metropolitan
Yeah,
areas.
but there's also a group of folks that want to continue to use a card, they don't want to use their phone, they want to continue to use cash. It has nothing to, I mean, yeah, it's.
Then why is the
non-bank,
MTA charging $1 for that plastic
that's
card?
different, but
For
that's
those,
different, but that's different, that's different conversation.
people who
I mean,
can't afford a phone can't afford $1 for that plastic card.
Well, there are
And the
people who,
MTA is charging that.
there are people who can
That's a
afford
different
phones,
topic.
but there are people who have phones that choose not to use the phone.
That's exactly
There are
right.
people
Yeah.
That have bank accounts and they choose not to use their credit cards or their debit cards because they feel as though they're being tracked and that the MTA is gonna have. I know, but that's my system, we work on that system. So
If
I know
it's a
about
low
that.
volume question, please repeat it so the entire audience can hear it.
I'm not sure where that question actually ended up going to, but the point was simply, I think, on serving demographics that are choice or or by some other method, cash preferred or unbanked.
But it's
I
a
think
great
too,
point,
Peter
right? It
makes
has
a
to
good point
get.
about the unbanked as well.
Yeah.
Here in New York in particular, the unbanked and underbanked skews higher than the rest of the country. Peter, you can weigh in here. There are some solutions with mobile phones for cash customers, right? We hear about them all the time where someone can go into a merchant, hand over $20, and have that $20 be in the phone somewhere virtually that they can use in the transit system. But that's not all over the place.
Right.
And that's a real challenge for transit agencies when they talk about what Zack is talking about, which is this idea of equity and making sure that everybody can play fairly in the new system.
Yeah.
So Zach, you were talking about the European system a little bit, or some foreign systems in other markets. So besides the very important topic of underbanked and getting fair prices for everyone, specifically Europe and my country of origin, Germany, they're thinking a lot about just making everything electric. And with that, just a lot of new business models come about as well, besides who's paying for the charging stations, who's paying for all the scooters and all this kind of stuff, and how are you paying for it. But just by thinking about making everything electric, everything becomes just more digitalized as well, because the new business models happen on platforms and happen on payment systems. So what are you seeing there happening in other markets than the US that might have, I don't want to say are further or just different for now?
Well, on the payment side, I'm not sure if that has, those two are maybe correlated, but not necessarily causal in the sense of like electrification is one trend that's happening and digitalization is one trend that's happening. They ultimately end up supporting one another. Yeah, I think as far as integrated mobility is concerned, we're seeing Europe taking a different perspective in terms of payments, and that I think is largely as a result of their payment ecosystem. Obviously, contactless cards, for instance, are far more mature in Europe, and that gesture, there's a lot more habituation in terms of understanding, that there's a contactless payment as opposed to having to swipe or chip and pin. Yeah, and then we're seeing this sort of infatuation with this bundling concept, but one of the reasons that is something maybe that in Europe seems to be a little bit more the accepted understanding of this term mobility as a service is because there is unified countrywide transit payment schemes. And one thing from the transit perspective, as you well know, Peter, is that right now, if those I'm sure in this room are familiar with closed loop versus open loop, we're talking about contactless payment cards. But the distinction is that if you're using a payment method for your transit system that can be used for non-transit purposes, that would be what we classify as an open loop payment system. Closed loop, like the Metro card, you put $20 in the Metro card, other than if you were to call up and depending upon what the agency's policies are, that $20 lives in that transit system, right? So you have these islands of atomized payment systems that are very difficult to coordinate around in terms of integrating transit with other different payment methods, which is why contactless EMV is so exciting, because it automatically then jumps beyond those barriers, which are oftentimes technical and actually oftentimes vendor related, as your story shared, Peter, which I love, by the way, is so true. You have these vendors that own keys that they will not necessarily share for the transit agencies to be able to facilitate integrations. Something that we are very focused on disrupting, to use a loaded term in the industry. So I think there are some systemic payment industry and policy, top-down policy and regulatory issues that in Europe are maybe driving the payments industry in a different direction when it comes to mobility.
Peter, how are you seeing the change of, or evolution, I should say, of transport happening, and how the government is stepping in terms of setting regulation for fair pricing, but also just in terms of standards and security? Do you have a perspective on that?
Well, the government has always set pricing for transit. Every of our price points is a tariff approved by the New York State legislators. So all of our price points, our tariffs are in transit. They are government priced. So what do I think of that? I think that That's the way we do it.
How do you think
when
though,
a
that the
transit
regulation
authority
can be set to influence where everything's going? So for instance, if we stay with this example from Europe, they just announced in Germany that they're going to put extra tariffs on flights and make trains cheaper. So how do you see this being influenced, let's say in New York?
I don't see that happening here, but
Why do you think that?
that's just a personal opinion, because I don't think that the population would allow it to happen. I don't think that the populace would accept it as a de rigueur way of doing business. But that's just an opinion. I have no research to back that up. Sheikah might know the answer to that better than I would, because she would probably have done the research to determine whether or not it's possible.
Peter, do you think that's because our intercity rail system isn't, as robust as European intercity rail
No,
systems?
I think it's because our cost recovery ratios are under 100%. Michael, what's the cost recovery ratio today at the MTA for our various authorities?
Yeah, actually the MTA's cost recovery is better than.
Well, the MTA is a headquarters group. Let's talk about the operating agency.
No, the operating, that's what I'm talking about, the operating agencies.
What does that mean, cost recovery?
It's
Cost
fare
recovery
box, yeah.
means that
It means that how much you didn't lose.
That's right. That is exactly right. How much did I not lose? How much did I recover?
40 cents.
For every dollar of revenue, it cost.
Railroads versus the agent versus New York City subways and buses, but I think it's generally around 40, 45. Depends on how you do it, but that's basically.
When I was working for
which is
Thales,
high.
when I was working for Thales and we were talking to the MTC and looking at what was happening for Clipper 2, BART had the best cost recovery ratio of any transit authority in the United States at around 84%. That's the best. New York is under 50%. So for every dollar we spend, we lose 50 cents. I mean,
Do airlines make any money?
that's a question. But they're not government tariffs.
I know.
Right.
So Zach, with
Oh,
that
right.
cost bucket against you, how do you work together with the officials in order to
The
make
answer to that
better
is
revenue
probably no.
opportunity for them?
Yeah. Government agencies, transit agencies are actually, they're not for-profit businesses, obviously, they're government agencies. And in the US, they're not interested in having fare box recovery ratios that exceed, the dollar that they spend for the most part.
No, you'd be paying $20 for a subway ride if they did.
Exactly. And again, back to that equity issue, right? I think public transit specifically in this country is seen as a right and a utility, a service.
Not only that, but in New York, the long distance rider is subsidized by the short distance rider.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Which is a progressive fare policy.
I mean, we pay the same amount whether we travel 1 mile or 50 miles.
Again, yeah. I think that
There were people, when I was working for the MTA, who was it that they were actually trying to get into the Guinness Book of World Records to ride every mile of the 469 stations and stop at every one, get off and get back on the next train, and they were trying to get themselves in the Guinness Book. Do you remember that? I don't remember who it was, but I remember that happening.
Yeah, we can get
Sorry.
yeah, it's okay. We can get into a conversation around fare policy and what the right fare policy is.
I do that every other week.
Yeah, so let's get back to the purpose, right? The payments and the future mobility, and I'd like to get the perspectives, including yours. Your work is about all of these different services and mobility and bundling all of these transactions, and somehow we're somewhere along the line they all have to be processed. And so, from a payment processing standpoint, how do you see who is this mobility manager? Who's owning all of this, and who's doing the processing? So I think it's great that you've got suppliers, you've got Peter's experience, and then you've got a payment processor, kind of.
I was about to say.
Well, this is a
let's
card
get
issuer.
that back to Shika.
Yeah. So what's your vision? How do you see that?
You're both.
I'm happy to answer, but I'll let you go first.
You want me to go first? Sure. So honestly, I think in reviewing the white paper and thinking through what the mobility manager's role is, from American Express's standpoint, the challenge is unlike what we see happening in China, like the WeChats of the world. there isn't ever going to be, at least what I can see in the foreseeable future, a super app or a super mobility manager in this instance that will really be able to be at the centerpiece of all of those services that all of the consumers are looking for.
Really, you don't see a Cirrus or a Plus coming along like for worldwide sharing of ATM usage. You don't see even nationwide happening in transit.
For transit specifically, it could happen
Or
nationwide.
or
yes.
mobility. No.
I think it could happen in transit if we think about just the point that Zach is making as far as there are so many disintermediated systems within America of closed loop, open loop. We are starting to progressively get to open loop and get to have all of them be EMV enabled. So, you know, there are steps happening in the right direction. Do I think that will expedite in the way that China has? No, not anytime soon. But then when we think about businesses like American Express, what does that mean? It's thinking through what makes sense as far as services and products that Amex should offer versus when does it make sense to go out to a third party or partner with someone or acquire somebody to then provide those goods and services.
Right, so there's a profit motive here, whereas out here, there is, if you're a transit service provider that isn't Lyft or Uber or a bike share or a scooter share, or if you're not a Masabi, there isn't a profit motive. There's no profit motive here with the MTA. There's no profit motive.
Well, I think this is the real point, right? And this, because everything breaks down if you don't have that payment processing taking place in one central location. And I think it's really about a transit agency's ability to corral all of this, or somebody has to take the lead, right? And typically, it's been the city's management, because a lot of this congestion management and capacity management is really about a city's ability to efficiently manage their operations or their services, including getting people from point A to point B. So someone, again, this is my view. My view is that it needs to be either a regional transit agency or the city itself, if a city has responsibility for the transportation network, including taxis and Lyft and pedestrians and buses and subways. But I was just thinking about what you all see. I mean, you did the report, and then from Zach's standpoint, I think you're absolutely right, Zach. This is not a technological problem. This is a business issue. This is a mindset change that has to take place where somebody's buying in, that somebody's taking that role on.
Maybe just to answer this real quick from our side. So in the report, we're sharing the opinion that that's one of the opportunities in the market space that's out there. There's no, like you just said, there's no one spot right now or one big platform that does that currently. But there are players who are wanting to either go big and be that exact player and provide the services across different modes of transportation, or you see a lot of companies that are focused on niches on one piece of the value chain and want to do the transaction there and the services that are around it. But there's a lot of opportunities for the current players to take that spot, and it can be this. Current players can be a lot of different players who can take that spot or can share that spot. One is obviously you will see the autonomous car development go further, and all these folks will try to make money on the mode of transportation there as well. So, you know, the Ubers and Lyfts of the world, they're thinking very heavily about payments as well and how to facilitate transactions in order to facilitate their services better. But so do others, like the big tech companies, what we can see from, you know, what they're declaring publicly. Google does try to get into this. We're seeing this in the market space. You know, we know Facebook is trying to come up even with their own cryptocurrency. So this is not far away of once you have a currency to also figure out what you want to do with it. So, but then also the city and the public transportation agencies that are there, also they have very good starting points to go off of. You had a question?
I mean, public transportation authorities are just like any merchant. If I walk into a corner store, they would take Apple Pay, MasterCard, Amex, right? Whatever, or cash. Why do I have to subscribe to MTA? Why do I was in Milwaukee. I'm a big fan of public transportation. I was trying to buy their stupid little card, right? I went up and down Milwaukee Airport, right? I asked this person, asked that person, and I found the damn machine. Did it work? Did it take my credit card? No. I ended up taking Uber. So why doesn't any public transportation system has an app where I could download? I'm not a big Uber fan. I started.
Do you understand the procurement policies of public authorities? Do you understand? Answer that question. Do you understand the procurement? Do you understand the procurement process of public authorities?
Yeah.
Because if you don't understand the procurement process, then it's very hard to answer this question.
But to unpack this a little bit, what you're also saying
they're about check and balances, right? But that's hindering the consumers.
Yeah, but this is
Just
where.
so that they have check and balances. Their cover is CYA. It's, I don't want to say it.
Well, I mean,
But to
if
unpack
I'm-
this, what
if
you're
I'm-
also saying, you want to have it easy for you.
If
Right,
I may
you want to
answer
have
that,
it.
Sebastian.
I'll give it to you right away. So
Yeah.
you want to have it easy for yourself, right? So that's exactly
Yeah.
the opportunity for someone independent to make the connections between the dots, so that you don't have to think about where am I right now, where do I need to go to get a ticket. You're just going away with, towards where you want to go, and it happens in the background. So if there is someone where you sign up and the subscription is with that provider who gets their money from wherever you need to go, that's the opportunity for that player.
I slightly disagree with that actually, but my answer to that is that we're doing just that. We are shipping a platform to transit agencies that actually, to your point, Peter, about procurement policy. Procurement policies actually is one of the major reasons or the major hurdles that these transit agencies are not able to innovate in an agile method. But from our
I
perspective,
can buy a stamp anywhere in America.
you can buy a stamp anywhere in America.
Why
Yeah,
can't
but it's
I
not
buy?
it's not
why
a
can't
New
I
York
buy,
State authority.
Subway?
That's right,
I mean-
sorry. It's not a New York State
US
authority.
Postal Service is not defined by government procurement systems.
So there are a couple of reasons in terms of the technical constraints, and in terms of being able to accept, for instance, a credit card, or if you wanted to, you could hand
I
over
could buy a
cash.
stamp with a credit card.
I'm talking about in a public transit ecosystem, right? So many public transit agencies just don't have the infrastructure yet. So there are hurdles to get over from the infrastructure perspective. But certainly what you're describing is what vendors and suppliers like ourselves are actively doing. And I think your point about wanting to use whatever fare media or whatever payment method it is that is most convenient to you, that is how people should be traveling on public transit. Public transit should not be
Mobility.
public transit. Any mobility, any type of mobility option should not be prescribing to a rider what form they should be paying in. And so the onus is on payment providers like ourselves to be able to provide transit agencies with technology to be able to accept the widest range of payment methods. And I think ultimately that will make it easiest for passengers to move around the systems. And separate from that, there's a question of discovery, which is how does a passenger know to take that trip? And discovery and payments are not necessarily the same thing and don't necessarily have to be bundled together as one offering.
And I'd be curious about your point of disagreement, because what I was trying to say was that at some point there might be someone like a mobility manager who helps you to get from A to Z. If you are in a city that you don't know, they help you to, like Google does, starting to do, right? They help you to get the right mode of transportation, but at the same time, all the payment happens within that space. You don't have to go and buy a ticket or buy a stamp. It just happens on that platform. So there's right now, that's what I'm saying is there's right now a gap in the marketplace of people or of providers for that service.
Yeah, I guess my question is, why does that have to be one provider? I'll give you an example. We're integrating within a company called Transit App, which is one of the leading journey planning applications. They are handling multimodal trip planning, and we are issuing the ticket to the passenger. They're actually handling the payments. So once the payment is processed, we get a call to our API. We issue the ticket. Then the ticket lifecycle management is something that Masabi handles. The transit agency that gets access to the fact that somebody used that ticket was issued. And then if someone wants to continue along the trip that was presented to the passenger, that multimodal trip that was presented to the passenger, for instance on a scooter, they could then go to the scooter station. They're shown the scooter station that they should be going to once they get off public transit, and they can unlock that scooter, and that scooter is unlocked through an account that's managed within Transit, and then Transit just passes the credentials along to the scooter company. It doesn't, to the rider, that experience is one transaction, but it's not a subscription and it's not a single transaction in effect. So I guess the question then is, in my mind, what's the problem that we're solving if we're bundling and if there's one provider for all of that service?
Who's responsible for the settlement in that system?
It depends on where the transactions are going.
So it's not one single entity. It
doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to be a one single entity, right? So the payment, let's say the payment on our side between Transit and Masabi is being processed either by Transit or by Masabi. We're getting a little technical here, but the merchant account could be the merchant, it could be Masabi, and then we're settling. That's on the public transit side. And then on a micro-mobility trip, that payment credential and that payment process could be managed directly between Transit and, a Lime scooter. And maybe Lime is processing that payment, and maybe there isn't any clearing that needs to happen at all. Now, obviously,
because it would be an on-us transaction then.
An on-us transaction in what sense?
An on-us transaction doesn't require settlement. An on-us transaction is on us. So,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if I bank at Citibank and I use a Citibank ATM, that's an on-us transaction. If I bank at Citibank and I use a JP Morgan Chase ATM, that's a not on-us transaction. Not on us has to be settled. On us doesn't.
Right. So then, obviously, you're getting into clearing and apportionment, and then that's.
Well, I was asking who's doing the settlement, and you saying it depends on who does the transaction.
I have a question. How does currency fluctuation factor into mobility payments? Because you do have, like, for example, let's say Brexit happened again. Somebody's losing money in a couple of days, and settlement usually takes like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question.
That is an interesting question. That's not one I've thought about.
Yeah, to my knowledge, there are very infrequent trips that we're describing that are cross-border trips, frankly.
So let's say a tourist, for example, uses their mobile phone from Euro to convert, let's say uses Amex card to purchase a Metro card. Let's say add 10 million people to it. Now there's Amex taking the hit here, most likely to be a foreign exchange desk here, trying to figure out how to settle it in 2-3 days. How, like, somebody's losing money here, somebody's gonna make money. How is everyone protecting themselves? I don't find this in the paper, but I'm just asking this question.
How's that different from current point of sale transactions?
Yeah, so I was wondering, like you get euros, like Amex will get euros. They're gonna convert into dollars. Give the person the $1 or $2 that they need to do the transit. Eventually, Amex has to settle that $3.
You're looking if there's arbitrage in this model versus how any other commerce is being conducted.
And then you have black swan events, especially when Libor the Libor issue. I guess Libor is getting it's getting replaced, but literally when somebody's making interest rate change, Swiss did it like in 2015, where they just stopped pegging to the euro, completely wiped out the market. A lot of people lost money. A lot of FX players actually lost their business.
So it sounds like that's like a real-time payment.
Yeah.
question.
So you have a real-time
RGP can take
payment,
care of that.
and then you have a settlement 3 or 4 days later. What's going on with that?
But that already exists. I think that's already being managed.
With any kind of payment.
Within the next.
Exactly, that's already managed. That's not something that we think about.
But it would be reduced if everybody were on real-time payment rails, which settle immediately.
Are you a currency trader?
No, I help with.
Good question.
Are there any other
The
questions? I
FX
think we're
gets
supposed to
settled
stop at
in your
7:30.
typical fashion. I mean, that's not an issue for you.
No,
No,
I
you're
think
gonna
you're
settle it.
totally correct. Is that there could be daily fluctuations that on the back end we need to deal with the bank issuer. So that is handled in kind of like the day-to-day and business as usual work that would happen, and it would account for any larger fluctuations as well.
So I had a question because you mentioned that there's multimodal things in like Uber. I just checked my Uber and my Lyft app. I don't see anything about scooters or.
Yeah,
They're starting to think about that though.
depends where you are.
If
So
you're in
if you put
Denver,
your
you
pin-
see Uber. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
The MTA is looking at building a MAS model simply because they recognize they've lost ridership to Uber and Lyft.
Can you repeat the question? They couldn't hear.
Sure. The question was Deborah here opened her Uber app and couldn't see scooters or bike share? Uber owns a company called Jump. Uber is also integrated with Lime. Both Jump and Lime operate electric scooters and bike share, free-floating bike share systems. So within the Uber app, depending upon where you are, you can book and pay for those systems.
This is nothing to do with payments, but regarding scooters, I was in Atlanta a couple months ago, and it was late at night. I went up to the subway, and I saw a guy get off his scooter, and he literally just tossed it in the air, like for fun. So I read an article that says the scooters are not really ecologically advanced, because the people who run these scooter companies have to drive around all over the place and pick up the scooters and then repair them. So really, it's not any better than taking a car. It seems better, but it's not.
Well,
Wow.
yeah.
I don't know if you guys have ever seen anyone toss a scooter in the air.
Do you want to take that?
No, I've never seen
YouTube
anybody throw a
videos about
scooter.
torching scooters, lighting them on fire. I don't know.
Yeah.
There are
Really?
images of hundreds of thousands of abandoned bicycles somewhere in China, which is a similar program.
Yeah.
So I think that just happens.
It sounds really good, but
But I'm just wondering, since Uber is such a pioneer in this space, what would prevent Uber from becoming that integrator and also bringing the mass transit systems onto their platform?
Yeah, they're doing that right now. There's a concept that's I just came from the American Public Transit Association annual conference, and something that that was a much talked about concept is a concept called walled gardens in the space, where each individual digital app is trying to create an ecosystem that is unique and whereby passengers are actively captured within that walled garden, as opposed to being open and allowing for someone to book an Uber, for instance, within Google Maps. And so, I mean, this is the strategy that the Ubers, the Lyfts, other players are advancing, which is to try to capture as many eyeballs and own the trip from whatever mode it is that a passenger chooses.
Just wondering, so between contactless card,
Just speak up a little bit, sorry.
Yeah, so between contactless card and mobile contactless payment, like what do you see as a winning concept in transit and beyond?
In transit and beyond?
Yeah.
Do you want to take that one?
My personal opinion and what we've started to see in research is the mobile device is going to continue to be the winning form factor, and it's because at least in the environment we're in right now, you can use it for both contactless, but then also these in-app different like rideshare programs and providers.
But even contactless card faster though? I mean, you need to pull it out before you
Yeah, and it's getting faster in the sense that if we take Apple Pay, for example, as for those who've used it before, you'll know that you do typically have to authenticate in order to make a transaction. What they did when they launched in New York with the MTA is they actually removed that authentication feature, and now you just have to tap. So it even takes away that potential latency that would exist in having to verify your biometric in that moment. And in the watch, yeah. And you can honestly have that chip form factor and that payment form factor, as long as it's EMV enabled, it can live really in anything. And so what I'm wearing today is an Amex band, which has an Amex contactless chip just in this band, and we can manufacture these in, a standalone band like this, or within the watch that you wear daily.
It's a device.
Yeah, we haven't really talked much. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I was about to relieve you from the rather uncomfortable chairs and invite you for refreshment, but
that's fine. I can hold my tongue then.
I suggest we move over and just have a couple of refreshments that we can still enjoy while we're here.
Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
they're uncomfortable in
Good to see
high
you.
school. It felt fine
Nice to see
while I
you.
was on it. Yeah, of course. It's great.
Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you.
I don't have one on me today. But yeah.
Thank you very much. I also.
Yeah, you guys were based in
I'm in New York, yeah.
I'm sorry? Yeah, it's of course.
Thank you so much.
I will definitely.
I want to talk to you about five.
Oh, yeah, let's do it. That's actually a special area for you.
Over the years,
Not as of recent. It was really through their card.
Well, I'll tell you about your So I was
I hear you're in the Coast Guard. How's that going? Have you been there for a while?
I saw your tag. I'm friends with your dad.
There you go.
I saw him.